Yes, yeah, my name's Gavin Allwright, and like Geoff, I'm an evacuee from that region. Actually, I'd like to take you just through the first week of that situation, and then I will explain a few other points after that. What a lot of people forget is this was a triple disaster. We had the earthquake. Then very quickly, within an hour, we had the tsunami, which actually came in about 2 or 3 waves, and then Fukushima. And actually, my wife, who's Japanese, her family all are from the tsunami coast. They're all fishermen, shipbuilders, shipbreakers. And on that day, we lost all communication with the entire extended family. Later we found out we'd lost 2 of the close family, many friends, sort of wider relatives as well, and 15 out of the 30 workers at my father-in-law's company had died. Now, we were able to bury those dead. The people who came from the exclusion zone weren't. Those bodies were left on the beaches for weeks, and in some cases months, before they were able to go out and identify the bodies and actually look after those. Now, on the day after the earthquake, I'd watched the house that I'd actually built by hand with my wife and kids, my 3 young ones, wobbling there in front of me and survived. And I was very, very happy that night. You know, even though we had many aftershocks, I was extremely happy. I've got a house. When we find the family after the tsunami, they can come and live with us. A knock on the window that evening, the evening of the 12th, was an explosion that happened at a power station. I didn't understand the word Hudson. I understood it was power station, but I didn't know it was a nuclear power station. And I lived through the Chernobyl. I remember the Chernobyl situation here. I was about 16 at the time. And my youngest son has extremely serious respiratory issues. The moment I heard that we were only 55 kilometers from that site, and unbeknown to me, actually in the prevailing wind direction. We were in the car, we were heading towards the mountains, but we'd run out of fuel. There was no fuel, and actually the region wasn't refueled for 3 weeks. So people literally couldn't move. There was no electricity, there was no telecommunications. We just didn't know what was happening. Radio, yes, but it was an absolute mess. It was a breakdown in absolutely everything. There was no food. So anyway, we headed towards the mountains. We couldn't get over the mountains because all the mountain roads were out because of the earthquake. We finally got across, found a petrol station that had giving out 5 litres of fuel to each customer, and we reached a friend's house on the other side of the mountains. Now, there was a huge problem because all the medical staff were heading east to the tsunami area. All of the supplies, everything was heading east. Refugees were heading west, and it was an incredibly difficult situation. We didn't have anything over there, and I was starting to worry about my son. We had no news from the family there. The first explosion, quickly followed by the second explosion, quickly followed by the 3rd explosion. At that point, we headed south, and I got my family out of Japan. Now, within a month of being back in England, I headed back to Japan and worked on the reconstruction of the tsunami areas, and also I went back to the village that we were living in. Now, I would say about 15% of the young families with children had evacuated. They just said, we are not staying here. I went back to try and help out to see what I could do. The social fabric, the fabric of that community was being ripped to pieces. We were getting hate mail from people that had stayed, saying that we'd abandoned them, that we weren't part of the community anymore. How dare you even come back? Other people understood. It was an incredibly difficult time for my wife. She was in Britain, her family was in a school. living on the floor for 9 months in a school. We tried to help the children by, we wanted to skim the surface of the schoolyard. But we had a major problem. We weren't in Fukushima. We were in the very south area of Miyagi, which is actually closer than most of Fukushima is to the plant. We're 55 kilometers away. Fukushima city is actually about 70 kilometers away. So we were closer, but the Miyagi government absolutely refused any remedial efforts in Miyagi, because the moment Miyagi was labeled as radioactive, nobody would buy the goods from Miyagi, and that is, I'd say, probably 30% of the economy of that region. What did we do? In the dark of night, we went out, got a digger, and we did it anyway. The local officials went completely insane, and there was a blanket ban on anybody reporting. Now, this happened all the way along the border. And something I wanted to just say about that is the hot particles, which are not often talked about. We always talk about the airborne radiation and radiation in total. Hot particles are the dust. And there is a black dust that's absolutely everywhere in Miyagi. It wasn't even analysed for quite a long time, but it has now been analysed. It's very highly radioactive. Those tiny, tiny particles, you know, these paper masks don't stop it. The kids put their fingers in their mouth. One of those particles is enough to cause irreparable damage. I've certainly had a very large dose of radioactivity because I was active in the clear-up. You know, bodies that were being picked up that had died in the tsunami, they weren't even allowed to bury them properly or cremate them properly because they were toxic waste. People were pulling down their garden walls or throwing things away, being arrested for moving toxic waste out of the area. However, we were being told it was safe.
2 minutes.
Okay. So I just want to, that's the personal situation, but I just want to emphasize just a couple of things. One was that the children weren't evacuated, and I did actually challenge some of the local officials about this, and they said, we can't evacuate the children, because if we do, as a government, we have to certify it's safe for them to come back, and we can't. So we won't move. I don't even need to comment on that. It's an ongoing crisis. I mean, I think there's a real feeling now is, oh, Fukushima's done and dusted, and there was a very conscious decision to move airborne contamination to waterborne contamination. The Pacific Ocean is under incredible threat at the moment. The Americans are now starting to reap that on their west coast. But also the information control that Geoff alluded to, and I'm sure we're going to hear a bit more about it. To give you just an insight of how information was being used or abused over the last 3 years. In the first few days, I would say maybe a week, there was no information. Nothing was coming in. Basically just, oh, there's been an explosion. Don't worry about it. And we didn't have access very much. It was on television, but with very little commentary. Then, all of a sudden, there was an avalanche of information. Just a huge data dump on the population with no analysis. We had no idea. They were talking about becquerels, rads, microsieverts, millisieverts. Everyone was discussing what level was this? Was it similar to an X-ray? Gamma radiation. Nobody had a clue what was going on, and it seemed to be a very conscious effort to swamp us with information. And everybody started arguing. Just very quickly, then we got the control creeping back in. And actually, one of the things that I found incredibly difficult as I was teaching at one of the universities while I was there, they were sending professors from universities, including Tokyo University, which is the Oxford or Cambridge of Japan, into villages with professors who are supposed experts saying, it is safe, don't move. I was at public meetings where farmers put their hands up, asked questions, and were publicly humiliated and laughed at. It was a disgusting control exercise. And actually, a number of those professors were hauled in front of ethics committees at the university that I was in, saying, you cannot say that because you can't prove it. What the hell are you doing? Then we had, sorry, just one more minute. Then we had the seepage of truth. It started to come out from independent sources. The government started to release certain information. The Prime Minister was saying things. And then finally, just now, we've had this kind of real re-imposition of total state control, where if you say if I was speaking like this in Japan, I could quite possibly be arrested. And if I was a Japanese citizen, I certainly would be. So, thank you very much. But what I did want to just touch on, and it touched on a point that you were saying, I think a lot of people have heard the expression the nuclear village. And actually in July 2011, a few months after this, when I'd gone back to Tokyo, I was so angry. And actually, the 2 or 3 years that I spent back there, the year that I spent back there was characterized by being angry. I was just angry at everything. And what Geoff just said, I didn't actually know what I was angry at, but I actually went and confronted the TEPCO officials. I got in behind their security cordon, got into the building, didn't actually know what I was going to then do, but sat down with 3 or 4 of these guys because they were refusing to even discuss compensation. And the mentality there was, we have absolutely no idea what has actually happened. We just don't know. We don't know the patterns of radioactive spread at that point. They didn't know what isotopes had been released. They had no idea. But they were saying to me, it's your choice to leave. And interestingly, a short time after that, there was, sorry, I'm going to have to be very brief here. There was a case that came into court where a golf course owner took TEPCO to court, and the TEPCO lawyers actually were able to argue that the particles of radioactivity that left the reactor, once they left the reactor, the ownership of those particles transferred to the golf course. Now, this is the critical point. I mean, I laughed for the first time in many months at that. The important thing was, though, that the judges went, what are you talking about? That's absolutely ridiculous. How can you argue for that? But still found in TEPCO's favour. And the judiciary and also the regulators in Japan have basically are a revolving door, especially the regulators, sorry. And just on this last point was that the head of the compensation, independent compensation tribunal, if you like, who set the levels of compensation, he actually made a public announcement that he set it at 40%. So any statistics you hear about the cost of this, bear in mind, they are only going to pay 40%. And he was asked why. And he said, to save Japan. So I'm very happy that, well, I won't get any compensation, but all of the victims of Fukushima are basically donating 60% of their lives for the sake of that country. And, you know, that is something that we are all going to have to live with. So please bear that in mind. Yeah, thank you.